sprung out from the fact that I personally and many others, much more important opinion leaders in the world, were worried about the future of our specialty, which is not even recognized as a specialty worldwide. And during the next half hour, I'll try to give you a little bit of background, how this was actually born, what were the problems that we actually identified over 3 years of work, because actually the Lancet commissions, are initiatives that Lancet family journals launch about some issues of public health interest. So not just something very, very tiny, but of broader interest. And by definition, must involve many, many members, many experts from all around the world. And usually the work of a commission lasts a couple of years. We needed 3 years because of the complexity, and finally came out with the paper that Kurt mentioned a few months ago. So why we did so? Well, first of all, because we do not want to treat babies in 20 years like we were used to do 20 years ago. That's our motto, and that's what pushed us, because finally, all of a sudden, we realized that we were going nowhere. And I hope to motivate, after this talk, to embrace this philosophy and do something in a different direction. So why actually we thought that we were going nowhere in terms of innovation, in terms of research and development, to the point that we felt this risk to treat babies in 20 years like we were used to do 20 years ago? The first reason, the main reason, has been the stop of a trial that I think everybody knows. I don't want to do any name, but there was a phase 2B/3 multi-center international trial on a human recombinant protein that is able to promote lung growth. And that trial, that was obviously sponsored by a pharmaceutical company very much known, got stopped midway. No safety issue at all, no scientific issue neither, because actually the trial was based on a strong, more than 10 years history of preclinical and translational data and so on and so forth. But all the way, it was just stopped because the company management changed it, and they stepped in and said, well, we're never going to sell this drug enough to make enough money. So you know what? We just stopped the trial. And because of that, neonatologists and patients were left in the uncertainty in the middle of the trial. I don't know if some of you guys down there participated to this trial, but we were very, very much unhappy. And to use the words of my friend and senior co-author in the commission, Stephen Abman, he said, this is outrageous. And it's even more outrageous because it's not that we have a lot of trials in neonatology. We are not in oncology. That was the only trial for BPD at the time, right? Now, I also have to tell you that there was a huge delay, as you can see, because in the beginning, everything about this drug with IGF-1 was developed on an investigator-initiated basis because the industry was just not interested at all. Now, I must admit that trial, also because of our movement, but thanks to the financial involvement of Chiesi, the surfactant company, got restarted and is almost finished. It's going to be ended up by this summer, and we are very much thankful for that, and we're very much optimistic, I would say, and we see this restart also as a result of our movement following the Lancet Commission. Another example of something that should never happen and is not happening in other specialties: fetal surgery, tracheal occlusion for congenital diaphragmatic hernia. We have quite a lot of this in Paris. Now, that fetal tracheal occlusion has been proven to be effective to increase survival, right? Now, in the European Union government issued what is called MDR, Medical Device Regulation, which is supposed to make medical devices safer, right? But to the price that is imposed huge costs to the industries, because the devices must be tested in specific studies, and even if they were safe, even if they were minimally invasive, even if they were already on the market, okay? Now, the point is that CDH occurs in approximately 1 every 4,000 deliveries. Correct me if I'm wrong. That means that we're talking about a tiny population. And no industry can afford studies of that size for such a rare disease. And it would take a lot of money and it would take forever. So basically, this is because the risks of using a medical device that is minimally riskful were felt not by a clinicians, not by a neonatologist, but some clerk in an office. And the principle was right and may be actually functional to adult medicine, but it's actually not for neonatology. Beside the fact that we need to remember these people that zero risk does not exist in life, even less so in the NICU. And anyway, there is only one person, one healthcare professional that can actually evaluate the risk, and that's the neonatologist. And obviously, we were not involved in this MDR. This is why, following the MDR, all the European pediatric scientific societies involved in neonatal critical care somehow, first and foremost ESPNIC, but then also ESPR and others, they signed an open letter to the European Commission on Healthcare stating that, and the MDR has been stopped, has been delayed up to the end of 2027 in order to, allow to find new ways, at least for neonatal medical devices. And that's a good news. Now, let's talking about medical devices. Have a look at this picture. Those are all oscillators, right? Those are all ventilators capable to provide HFOV. We all know the very old and blessed Sensormedics, and then there are many others, and probably even a few others that I just didn't put in my slide, right? Now, we have all of them in Europe. I think that you also have some of them. The funny thing is that, you know better than me, in the US, they only have the Sensormedics. They don't have any of the others. So either we are going to the wrong direction or there is something wrong with the FDA that actually, in a sort of a MDR style, does not allow all the other ventilators into their market. Some of them are American, particularly this one on the right, just because there's no trial about that. Fair enough. I get the principle. It's like the MDR regulation that I showed you from the European Commission. But then, explain me that. This is the neonatal dialysis machine, okay? That has been an invention of an adult nephrologist in Italy. And he made no patents just to make it available for all over the world. It has been brought by Medtronic, a huge American and multinational company with its headquarters in Minneapolis. And you see here with the extracorporeal circuits running in my NICU, it's very much accurate. You can even do extracorporeal dialysis in a preemie, like this one, okay? And you know what? That machine has been approved by the FDA with no randomized trial at all. They just approved the machine based on a comparison of two registries, the American registry of neonates treated with dialysis with the adult big cumbersome machines versus the Italian registry treated with that machine. So no randomization, no nothing. It's just an observational registry comparative study. And you see that their study showing that the survival, I'm sorry, somebody got the microphone open. The study on table 4 showed that the survival doing dialysis with the neonatal specific machine actually was associated to an improved survival. So why do you need randomized trial to approve oscillators, meaning machines that are providing something, I would say even very old. HFOV is a very old technology, and you do not need any trial to approve a machine that is doing something completely new and possibly much more invasive, because we are on extracorporeal circulation, much more invasive compared to HFOV. I don't know. And this also seems to me something very much clerk dependent. Another example of wrongful or anyway sidetracked innovation in neonatology. Phase 2B trial, again on IGF-1, I can tell you, promoting lung growth, is seeking ethical approval because it changed it and it needed to start again. So it was, first of all, it was approved in 2017 before it got stopped by the Japanese company that didn't want to continue it. Then, as I told you, got restarted. Trial was always the same. There were just some minor administrative amendments into the trial protocol. So they asked for a new IRB approval into the same country. IRB rejects the approval, stating, and I quote, "How can you dare to propose it? Everybody knows that this is too risky." That was exactly the same IRB that approved the same trial like 8 years before. The rapporteur, the reviewer, was a pediatrician, not a neonatologist. And he thought that this was very much risky because the babies needed to have a central line, which is something that we do quite often. The IRB chair has been asked to jump in, and he refused to take any responsibility. So people were basically stuck into a sort of a sandwich in the middle. Nobody wants to take side. The trial is killed in that particular country that even right now is not doing the trial, that is run in other European countries, not there. So now I want to ask you, is this IRB actually working ethically? I don't think so. And it's not ethical because it has not given the appropriate value to knowledge and competence by giving a project to be evaluated by someone with not enough knowledge and competence in this field, because he was not, or she was not, a neonatologist. So our bottom line here in our Lancet Commission statement is that no one shall ever evaluate something he or she does not know and does not practice. That seems like a very basic principle, and I'm sure it's applied everywhere in all other specialties. Unfortunately, not yet for neonatology. Besides the fact that sometimes, I don't know if every time, but at least sometimes, IRB members are paid for their work, and this is really outrageous. Now, in Europe, I'm sorry, that's mainly about American and European examples, but I'm sure you have some examples and we can discuss over Q&A about that. In Europe, there has been a unified regulation about trials, and a European unified registry has been created. So when you start a trial, it must be into this registry, right? Theoretically, the purpose was good, was to shorten all the work. But in the reality, this is not going to work because it's not possible to submit non-substantial modifications, like just adding a new sentence. You can do that. You just can't. So either all the centers start together, or you can do that. And besides, it takes a lot of time to get into the registry, and there are conflicting applications across the different EU states because of the let's say standard operating procedures that may be different at the local level. So this registry, rather than speeding up the process, has done quite the opposite. And then another interesting case, a human recombinant protein, a surfactant protein, basically the surfactant protein D, like my first name, with anti-inflammatory properties and a strong preclinical background, is trialed in various countries. The trial is nicely being conducted, okay? It's up and running, no safety signal. Now, the industry wisely and correctly applies to the EMA for a PIP, right? Now, the PIP is the Pediatric Investigational Plan, is when you have a product that is still under investigation, but you want to ask to the regulatory agency what you want to do, what you need to do in the future, provided the current trial is positive in its results, what you're going to do next. You need a phase 2, you need a phase 3, you can skip one of these, you may use real world data, how many trials do you want in order to know how to get to registration. Fair enough. Now, there is a committee, the pediatric committee in EMA, that should evaluate PIP. I was sitting there for quite a short time, and then I resigned before this happened. But the committee went beyond the PIP evaluation and said that the trial that was already up and running and approved by the several national authorities in the various countries where it was up and running, the trial was not safe. And they specifically wrote a letter to the national authorities to stop the trial. The National Department of Healthcare and so on were shocked in a couple of European countries because it's not up to the EMA pediatric committee to do that. So there was a little bit of a strange moment because it was supposed to be an illegal demand. But then, because nobody wants to have any responsibility, the trial was stopped. And then the industry went back to the EMA and they said it's not up to us. It's up to the national agencies. And then they went to the national agencies and the national agency said it's not up to us. It's up to the EMA. And the trial was stopped for like more than 1 year. Now, this is in principle very wrong. And it seems that there is no judge in Berlin. The patients were left, meanwhile, in a strange state. Those that started the therapy, they didn't know if it was for good or for not, how they should have been treated into a trial. We didn't know anything. And particularly, these guys seem, let's say, subjected to no jurisdiction. And nobody knows exactly what to do in this situation, as committees are just passing the buck from one to the other. But the most important thing is that meanwhile they discuss, meanwhile they don't want to take any side, patients remain without any therapy for an orphan disease, or even less, they started a therapy that is no more available. And nobody can convince me that a part of a problem is not related to the fact that our patients, unfortunately, do not speak and they do not vote. So, as I said, we want to avoid treating babies in 20 years like we were used to do 20 years ago. This is why the commission has been convened, but that means also prioritize patients' best interest over patient protection. Everybody's talking about patient protection, but patient protection against what exactly? There should be a protection against the disease that is still untreatable, incurable, and there are many. We'll see that in a minute. Not against the very nasty doctor or nurse that are doing research and they are like playing around, fooling around, and they may be somehow dangerous. In fact, in my home country, in France, the IRB are called, in French, Comité pour la protection de personnes, which translates into people protection committees. That is, to me, outrageous, because it means that these committees, these boards are there to protect patients against us, which is absolutely incorrect. Now, the example that the commission took during the reasoning that you may have read or you're going to read in our paper is that if we were set to apply all these regulation stuffs, all these details and others that I didn't even the time to mention, nowadays we wouldn't have surfactant, because all the experiments in animals and then in babies that have been done by these two beautiful colleagues, Mary Ellen Avery and Bengt Robertson, in America and in Europe, would have never been possible. I think that everybody can agree about that. Okay, and even less so, Tetsuro Fujiwara injected surfactant for the first time into the newborn trachea in Tokyo in the beginning of the 80s. And, just like that, just case series, 10 babies, something like that, it would have been absolutely impossible without a lot of authorization, like the IRB, the regulatory agency, the President of the Republic, the Prime Minister, the Pope, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not telling that all this is wrong. Again, I'm telling that all these authorizations should be targeted to protect the baby from the disease. Protecting the baby from the innovation is not giving his or her best interest, because most of our patients have untreatable, uncurable diseases, and this is what is creating these different lines here on the left. I'm sorry it's a little bit small, but I'll try to explain to you. Thanks to Nina Modi and a few other commissioners into the Lancet Commission, you see the red line over here represents somehow the amount of health of newborn babies with several diseases, like you see UGR, chorioamnionitis, and then you get sepsis, NEC, septic shock, ARDS, malformation, CDH, and so on. Now, with what we are able to do right now, that line has been pushed here at that level a little bit higher, and is represented by this dashed pointed line here, meaning that we have been able anyway to increase the health of these patients. But we did not exploit yet the full potential of newborn health, that in fact should be even higher here. You see the blue line, if we actually get to have new drugs, new medical devices for all the diseases that are untreatable so far, and particularly if we get to understand better the mechanisms of these diseases and to provide a personalized treatment. Because, and that's one of the other problems that we identify, everybody is doing a lot of pragmatic trials. Pragmatic meaning putting together babies with different pathophysiological condition, different pathobiology, just because they are below a given threshold of gestational age. I'm sorry, they have very often different disorders, and they need a more personalized approach, a more personalized neonatology, although everybody wants to have, or would like to have, the magical bullet that is, efficacious for everybody. Meanwhile, while we're doing that, for all the reasons that I mentioned and a few others, we lost a lot of drugs. Here on the right side, there is the cartoon listing a lot of drugs that were promising, with quite a strong background in terms of preclinical, but even clinical research, that have been stopped in the last 10 years at some level, at some point during the R&D. And you see that's a lot. There are pulmonary vasodilators that may avoid ECMO. There is recombinant human surfactant protein D. Maybe we're going to get there, hopefully, but we don't know. There is CC10. There was the artificial surfactant, metalloporphyrins, even for jaundice, can avoid phototherapy, and so on and so forth. And all these have been lost, not for scientific reasons, not because there was a true lack of efficacy. But now, after having blamed quite a lot the industry, the IRB, the regulatory agencies, and so on and so forth, I said something about us. I want to be very much honest, is also our fault for some reasons. And Julie was kind enough to ask me to write and to expand a little bit of this about, let's say, our fault in a review that I wrote with a bunch of friends for seminars. Hopefully going to publish it very soon. But here, the graphs that you see here show you the number of articles published in PubMed, so the research product in adult critical care versus neonatal critical care. I think the picture is self-explaining and cannot be justified with a different denominator, because even if you take into account the number of patients that we have, still there is a huge difference between the two types, the two worlds of critical care. And it's not only about the quantity, it's also about the quality of our research. Here is an editorial I wrote a few years ago for JAMA, and we had a little bit of fun to go and double check every single surfactant trial that was published between 2009 and 2019 at the time. 42 surfactant trials were done without the knowledge of how much surfactant was injected, or with a wrong dose, not 200 milligram per kilo dose, which is supposed to be the best one. Now, can you imagine something like that for a trial about carboplatin in oncology? Or a trial on Paxlovid during pandemic, so when there's a big of emergency and you give Paxlovid, then how much? Well, I don't know, I just gave him Paxlovid. I don't think so. So it's not understandable that just, we don't know the dose because we didn't weigh the patient or something, or amiodarone, or even ampicillin. Everybody's very much careful in giving the right dose of ampicillin. So that's let's say, a typical type of mistakes that we do and we can even easily avoid. And look on the right. That's the famous or infamous list of diseases that are still without a definite cure or treatment. Let's have a look about that, because it's not only about premise, it's not only bronchopulmonary dysplasia or IVH or NEC. Fair enough, there are alloimmunizations. It's not so rare in the end. Congenital diaphragmatic hernia, those are term babies usually. Other malformation, Paolo De Coppi is actively working on regenerative medicine in London about these, and metabolic disorders, and few others for which we don't even know the mechanisms. Growth restriction, heart failure, HIE, liver multi-organ failure, ARDS, which has been defined in 2017, while it's been around for quite a long time. And funny enough, these diseases and disorders, though some of them are syndromes, remind us that the majority of the innovation that we had in neonatology so far came from the adult critical care medicine. You see, dialysis, ECMO, but even in the past, mechanical ventilation. Everybody knows the history of Patrick Bouvard Kennedy, parenteral nutrition. Therapeutic hypothermia has been started in adult critical care as post-cardiac arrest care, and so on and so forth. But there are a few innovations that have been, let's say, started for neonatology and then somehow translated, at least for some adult patients, like CPAP or nitric oxide in the cardiac ICU, and so on and so forth. So that means that we may have some crosstalk. And that means that we need more multidisciplinarity. For sure, we may learn more from the adult medicine than what they learn more from us. But anyway, there can be a crosstalk. And I think that one of the most important messages of the Lancet Commission is that nobody should ever work in a silo. We are not in an island, and everybody can learn from each other. And we should, given the nature of our work, we should look much more often and much more actively to what is actually happening right now in adult critical care. Here is an example. That's a trial that we've been doing in Paris. Barbara Loy is my fellow. A few years ago, it's about pronation. You know, pronation has become very famous at during the COVID period, but obviously it's much easier to flip around a baby than an adult. This is what we did, and we analyzed the lung volume with lung ultrasound and the oxygenation, and long history short is like in adult. When you pronate the patient, oxygenation is getting better, lung aeration is getting better. There is no side effect in terms of hemodynamics, and even more important, this is true not only for RDS or ARDS, but also particularly efficacious for bronchopulmonary dysplasia, for babies with chronically evolving bronchopulmonary dysplasia. And it's never been tried in COPD patients in adults. And I'm saying COPD because it's the adult condition, somehow pathophysiological, resembling a little BPPD, but maybe they're gonna do that after our experience. So in the end, are those two worlds so different? Well, if I look at these two pictures, the left one is my NICU, the right one is an ICU from the web, and looking how many machines and monitoring systems these two patients need, well, I would say that they're very, very much similar, and we thought that they weren't for too long time, and we need to change our perspective here. In fact, exactly on the same line, it's a real pleasure to see that two friends, Satyan from Sacramento and Robin from San Diego, they were not on the Lancet Commission. We didn't talk to each other. I can tell you that. They just published this beautiful consensus perspective on the Journal of Neonatology, which I remind is the official journal of the section of newborn and fetus medicine of the American Academy of Pediatrics, finally stating we need a separate residency and department in neonatal critical care medicine, because what we do is not just pediatrics. And in fact, they propose a new residency where there is 1 year of pediatrics, but it's a lot, like a couple of years of fetal medicine and obstetrics, and 2 years of adult and pediatric critical care medicine arranged in different ways. I'm not gonna go into the details. You can find it on the paper, but this seemed very much ideal for us. And on the other side of the ocean, the European Society for Pediatric and Neonatal Intensive Care, of which I'm no more the president, has anyway wrote a letter supporting this idea, as in Europe we felt more or less the same need. Why do we feel this need? Because the neonatologist is too many times considered like a sort of a stranger. And I showed you what is happening when there is no neonatologist into a IRB, for example, or in other bodies deciding for neonatal staffs. But again, some questions, some rhetorical questions. Have you ever considered having a non-oncologist evaluate chemotherapy? I think that nobody would do that. Or a general surgeon asking an opinion about cardiac malformation. He or she would immediately refer to a pediatric cardiosurgeon. Having internists assessing obesity and metabolism rather than an endocrinologist or somebody more qualified for that. Same. Having a non-cardiologist evaluating a heart failure. Absolutely. But this is what is happening. There are not enough neonatologists in the bodies, and few other specialists are actually evaluating the innovative projects for the disease of our patients. And in Europe, unfortunately, we are in a bad situation because despite the existence of the European Union, healthcare is regulated at the state level. It's not like in the US, at least the US up to 1 year and a half ago. And those that you see here are the number of full professors of neonatology in the European countries. Now, let aside Austria, that for some reason looks like a sort of a heaven. You see that we have even less than one professor of neonatology per million of inhabitants. And there is a bit of a difference, and no surprise, Spain and Italy are in a very, very bad situation. So something is needed. No professor of neonatology means do not recognize a specialty. Let aside create a separate residency, means not enough innovation, means difficulty in training the neonatology of the future. And if we do not realize that, and we do not realize that we need a separate track and more attention to our specialty, there is an actual risk to die, or anyway, as I said, to treat babies in 20 years like we were used to do before. So just to give you an overlook, the commissioners were 29, plus the editors of Lancet, but there were also many, many more advisors, people that couldn't get into the author line. There are very, very strict rules from Lancet. It took us more than almost 1 year to discuss with the editor to have the right list of commissioners. You cannot have any conflict of interest. They want us to respect the gender ratio, the age ratio, the academic age ratio, the geographical distribution. It's a mess. Many, many big and good names got out of the commission because they were not allowed. So this is why we had at least advisors that could but contribute externally to some of the works during the 3 years. And we finally dared to issue a lot of recommendations that I tried with all these practical examples to resume here for you. And they are divided for, let's say, in 5 categories. There are recommendations for the IRBs, the regulatory agencies, the governments and the, let's say, academy and hospitals, for the industry, obviously, that has a role in it, parents and families that must support us, but they must be family and parents that they do not take, they do not have to take the place of the neonatologist, who also has a lot of recommendations to avoid the, let's say, the mistakes that we have been doing, unwillingly, but we have been doing up to now. Everybody with just one aim, one purpose, which is the improved neonatal medicine for a better newborn health in the future. This is an example of some of the take-home messages that was for IRB ethical committees and regulatory agencies. For example, we propose neutral design, more space to real-world data, given more importance to translational and clinical pharmacology research that has not been done enough. Look for new forms of mixed funding. And just one last word about the value-based neonatology. That is a concept that in the end is going to embrace everything that I told you, because it's not about a single drug or a single medical device. It's about the value that our patients have. And we are the only doctors in the world taking care of patients that, if surviving, they will contribute to the society for several decades ahead. So they will be the citizens of tomorrow for several decades. That means that what we do has actually a huge value in terms of society. And if we think about value-based neonatology, which is a concept paralleling the value-based medicine that has been introduced, for example, for oncology right now, then much more investment and much more attention should be given to neonatology rather than to, I would say, any other medical specialty, because we may have less patients, but our patients have a much, much higher value. So thank you very much, and thanks also to David, who was very active into the commission, and I want to give credit to him because his beautiful pictures representing all the different ends, all the different actors and commissioners taking care of this beautiful baby was coming from the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dani. Again, I really enjoyed this talk because you brought us to sort of first the examples which I really liked about what is the hurdles in innovation. It could be a company in RBD, it could be a regulatory, and these examples are just in your face, I thought. And what I took from that part is, the ethics and the boards were there to protect the patient against us, the doctors, and our wild therapies. But now it really seems that we move to a phase where we now have to protect the patient against the ethical boards, because otherwise we just get no. Then you touched on personalized approach, which I really like, and then there was a long list of what do we need in neonatology? How do we get this innovation happening? And then you highlighted that we can take it from other fields, particularly the adult worlds, which I think is really, really good. And I do that myself. I work with a lot of adult cardiologists in my particular field in hemodynamics. To then say, what are the neonatal roles and what is the goals? And the goal is innovation. And I think this was an excellent summary of all those kind of things. People feel free to type some questions or maybe put your hand up and unmask yourself. But then that personalized approach, I'm very interested in it. What do you think a personalized approach is going to look like? And is that going to, are we going to stop doing randomized trials? Is there a new way?
Well, it's more complex than that. Trials are needed and they will be needed anyway. But, trials may be pragmatic or they may be more explanatory. So pragmatic means that you're going to put together, lumping there a lot of patients that may be very different in terms of pathophysiological phenotype or biological phenotype or even endotype. So now one thing that has been developed very much in adult critical care and in pediatric critical care, and we advocate for that with the commission, is to first trying to define what's the patient phenotype, and eventually, if possible, even the endotype. Characterize better what is his or her situation, and then do trials for patients with that particular situation. Now, one problem about that was that you may not be able to characterize the phenotypes of the endotype because you need samples and maybe invasive and so on and so forth. But now this is a little bit overcome because there are many monitoring techniques that are absolutely non-invasive or less invasive that you can absolutely use to understand better the patient pathophysiology. And there are several, mini invasive analysis that you can do with just a few drops of blood or something like that. So miniaturization has worked quite a lot, and we're thinking about, EIT, lung ultrasound, and the new optical system to measure the oxygen content into the alveoli. Just to name my small field of research, but that's the same. If you look at the brain with elastography or whatever, there are many of that. So we have no more excuse just to do pragmatic things. Obviously, it would be wonderful to have something that is working for everybody, but it's much more unlikely. Then another point is not just about the, let's say, the understanding of the phenotype of the endotype, which is very much important, but it's really about the study design, as you said. Now, trials are absolutely needed, but the adult medicine, and particularly the pandemic experience, taught us that there is also another way. There is the real world evidence. And now, for example, the Surfatan company is also working on that. And in some situations, at least, when there are, let's say, clear objections or more barriers to do a trial, well, the real world evidence, obviously produced with nicely conducted observational studies, is absolutely the way to go. Has been approved for several drugs, has been useful to approve several drugs in adults, and there is no reason why it shouldn't work in neonatology too.
For getting to people motivated to, because I from my personal experience as well, I got a little bit demotivated to do trials because of the ethics committee saying no, 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 no. And the questions they ask, by what I also agree with, but you're not even a content expert. So that part, I think your paper really helps to point out, if you're going to judge my trial, please invite some content experts. I think that's a way forward. On the other end, we need clinicians who like to become a bit more academic.
Absolutely.
How do we get there? Because everyone wants to work.
That's the conundrum. That's really the heart of the problem, and this is where the things become a little bit more national, if I can say so. Because, for example, you see, after the Lancet Commission, we had the main event to present the document at the European Society for Pediatric and Neonatal Intensive Care Congress. Then there was another, the Hot Topics in Washington, and now we're doing some small events in different countries, because most of the time, the two questions that you legitimately asked are questions to be discussed with the national authorities, right? And if we discuss that on, like, at the PAS or in this big international congresses between us, that may be interesting, that may be fun, but it's between us. I think that we all agree more or less, but that's not the point. You need also, you guys, I'm doing that in France and in Italy, to my countries. We need to discuss that with the Department of Healthcare, with the Department of Education of our countries. We need to be engaged. We need to, I know it's hard. I know it's on top of everything that we are already doing. I know, but that's the only way to go. We need to go to these people and say, hey, look, here is a problem. You didn't know, there's nobody's fault. Nobody told you before, but that's the problem. And we need to move in this direction. I can tell you that when we started to do that, at least in Italy and in France, I'm starting to see something moving. Possibly also because when you say so for babies, usually politicians, they seem very interesting, because no politician, right or left, it doesn't matter, wants to shoot on babies. Babies are of everybody, it's not a matter that is just for the right or the left. They want to appear very much careful towards the babies. And in fact, it's with them to ask, look, we need to have neonatologists into the IRBs. Hey, we need to have a track, a residency, whatever you want. And also, you mentioned that we need more academic neonatologists. So that's probably the trickiest part, because I guess you told me, I don't know exactly there in the beautiful Australia, but I guess that many young people, they do not choose our career because sure, it's beautiful, but it's tough. And you see babies dying, which is not funny anyway for nobody. Sometimes you need to work on Sunday, Saturday, and whatever, on New Year's Eve. And you're not going to become as rich as Trump anyway. I mean, the salary is okay, but you're not going to become like a movie star or something. And when it comes to money, this is when it's going to be tricky, because, everybody wants to be paid more, not only neonatologists, even cardiologists. And so that could be a problem.
All right. So in the next 5 years, how would you describe sort of our innovation? What can we expect in the next 5 years in neonatology? What do you think is possible and doable? I already heard you describe, EIT and those things which are now being commercialized, and I really like it. And the people who have adopted it from 20 years when people started working on it, they have it in their unit and say, "Oh, we're playing with." How can we roll out these kinds of things a bit more into the mainstream sort of neonatal unit, and make people realize that these tools, although they cost some money, they can actually help innovate and get babies at a better stage?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting point. because it can be applied to EIT, can be applied to lung ultrasound, can be applied to several things. Now, I have learned something that for some reason, maybe it's the human nature. When there is an industry behind a drug or a technique, a device, like in that case, then it's going to become much easier to implement it or diffuse it compared to when there is something in some colleague hand, which is good, which is as good as the industrial thing, but it's just Kurt proposing it or Danny proposing it, that's fair enough, but yeah, okay, this is his stuff, With the industry behind, the diffusion is going to be easier and quicker, possibly because obviously there's some money issue behind, I don't know. But as soon as there is an industry, I would be more optimistic, for example, EIT, you name it. And the same is for the drug, because, for example, IGF-1, now the trial is almost over. We'll see what is going to happen. But if results are positive, like we hope, well, there would be a drug company, a pharma company pushing it, getting approved, and, spread the word, and that is going to be much, much easier. But there is also something a little bit tricky. And I can really give you an example about that with lung ultrasound, just because it's my field. Now, lung ultrasound has no industry behind. It can't have. Why? Because to do lung ultrasound, you need an ultrasound machine, but you already have it, right? Everybody have an ultrasound machine. Everybody has an ultrasound machine in the NICU. Maybe to place vascular heart, to do echocardiography, to do brain ultrasound. You may want to change the probe, but those are peanuts. So there is no commercial pressure behind lung ultrasound, okay? But I still see some people that they have it there, they have the probe, and they didn't try, they didn't think, they didn't have this sparkling, think, just to say, well, just give it a try. So there is a part of the history again that is about us, and there is about, I would say, our mindset, right? Mindset in the sense of being more curious, of being more proactive, particularly when there are things that are absolutely non-invasive or I don't know, can be, as you said, can be helpful to characterize better the patient, and it costs nothing. So that is something that cannot be put on the industry shoulder, but it's us to change. To give you another example, a good friend of mine who is very much expert about EIT, published a lot about EIT. It's not David, I'm not talking about David. And somebody asked him, I saw him replying in a congress, how many babies are you monitoring with EIT, and how many clinical decisions did you take looking at EIT? I thought that he was replying like, 1,000, because, that's what they do. They do a lot of work with EIT. And surprisingly, he said, none. I only use EIT for research purposes. But this has been using like for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. So I think that now is the time. Either it works or it doesn't. If it works, why not using it?
Now, look, you're bringing good points of how us have a role in sort of promoting the innovation in our own clinics, and there'll always be early adapters, and people will follow over time. Danny, thank you so much for this. A really good opening for our sort of sessions in our webinars, talking about just neonatology as a whole, innovation, and how we can help in this innovation. And, I love to talk to you again in 5 years' time and see what we have reached sort of over that period of time. But
hope for the best.
Yeah. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
In 2 weeks, talking about, I think it's CMV.
That's a beautiful one.
All right. Thanks, Danny. And thanks, everybody, for attending.
Bye.